Chapter 1. Let's watch a movie preview. Part 2. A movie whose title had not yet even been decided should normally not exist. Yet an image appeared before us. It was none other than Kamiyama High School, which we were all used to seeing. It showed a classroom with tables and chairs lined up tidily. A look outside the window showed that the time was during sunset. A narrator began to speak in a husky male voice. It all began when a group of determined students from Class 2F decided to participate in the Kanya Festival in order to leave behind memories of their high school life. So they held a meeting one day after school to decide what to do. By the way, Kanya Festival is a nickname for the Kamiyama High School Cultural Festival, though we in the Classics Club do not call it as such. As for the reason, that's another long story. A group of students then appeared on the screen. 6 of them in total, seated around tables arranged facing each other. This must be the meeting scene that the narrator just mentioned. The camera then showed each person while the narrator introduced them with their names. First off was Kaito Takeo, a muscular male student who looked as though he belonged to some martial arts team. Sporting a crew cut, he was the tallest of the 6 students. Second was Sugimura Jiro, a slim-looking student and the only bespectacled male student. Perhaps due to having the camera pointed at him, he couldn't remain steady. Third was Yamanishi Midori, a girl with tan skin and dyed brown hair going down to her shoulder. Though a few seconds elapsed between various shots of her, her hair seemed to have grown a bit already. Next was Senoe Mamiko, a short girl with slightly wide girth. Rather than plump, it might have something more to do with her round face instead. Following her was Katsuda Takeo, a guy with rather good looks. Though his hair was dyed reddish, he felt like more of the serious sort of student. Finally, Konoso Yuri, a plain-dressed girl who looked quite relaxed despite having the camera facing her. She was the shortest of all the girls. As their names were being introduced, Satoshi quickly scribbled them down in his notebook. Most of the name spellings were guessed as they weren't written on the screen. After the introductions, the next scene showed the bespectacled Sugimura speak. How about we visit the Narakubo area? Ibara could be heard groaning. I knew how she felt, since the guy was reading his lines in a deadpan manner. The Narakubo area? Asked Yamanishi, whose hair length varied depending on the scene. The red-headed Katsuda replied, I think I've heard of that area. It's in Furuoka town if I remember correctly. Exactly. It's an abandoned mining village. It was born during the mining boom, though there's hardly anyone there now. It was deadpan dialogue all the way, but that was to be expected. Chitanda did say these were people from sports team who wanted to take part in the cultural festival after all. Can't really expect them to perform like the drama club. The well-built Kaito raised his arm to speak. Research in an abandoned village, huh? Sounds good to me. It would be good to go there once, as it does have an appeal that makes it worth visiting. A village with a history worth one's lifetime, that sounds interesting. Yamanishi's line here was slightly better as she imbued it with some emotion. It's probably her genuine feeling about the place. The round-faced Inochi responding with an equally good performance. The material may sound interesting, but it's an abandoned ruin, isn't it? Not exactly my type of place. Konosu, who wore a downcast look all this time, interjected. I know how to get to Narakubo. It's deep within the mountains. If we walk from the nearest bus stop, we'll get there in about an hour. Yamanishi didn't sound too pleased. She's probably the character that complains a lot. On the other hand, Kaito looked rather relaxed. We should be able to handle it if it's just an hour. We could ride bikes there and even have a picnic while we're there. Then it's decided. Our exhibition for the cultural festival will be a research into the history of the Narakubo area. Sugimura then gave a dissenting opinion, citing that just covering an abandoned village isn't interesting enough. He was backed by Yamanishi, who preferred to go somewhere else. Senoe suggested it could be fixed by presenting the story from an interesting perspective. When asked how it could be done, Sugimura suggested covering it like an adventure story, but was rejected for being too traditional. Konosu then suggested covering the occultish aspect of the area, which was approved for being interesting. Though Sugimura countered that more research would be needed as there were hardly any ghost stories from that area. What followed was an awkward series of give and take between the classmates as they debated heatedly amongst themselves on which ideas to adopt and which to reject. That was the main flow of this initial scene. As the scene blacked out, the narrator spoke again. A week later, the group headed towards the Narakubo area in Furuoka town. As the screen faded back in, the school scenery was replaced by that of a mountainous forest amidst the midsummer heat. This was no doubt the Narakubo area. I knew where Furuoka town was. It's about 20 kilometers north of Kamiyama city. It was once a prosperous town due to a rich deposit of lead or some other metal in the mines nearby, but like any other town that solely relies on one industry to prosper, it has since fallen into hard times once the mine was exhausted. But what of the Narakubo area? That was the topic Ibara and Satoshi were discussing. Fuku-chan, you heard of Narakubo? Unsurprisingly, Satoshi of course knew. Yup, it used to be the main mining area for the Furuoka mines. While getting there is inconvenient, at its height it was pretty prosperous. He then went on to list a few famous enka singers. These were the sort of celebrities that they managed to invite to perform in the area. Ibara looked a bit surprised. So did I, for the names Satoshi listed were quite prominent. However, as Satoshi was about to continue, Chitana cut him short. It's about to start. As the picture moved along the dense forest, it showed a group of students. Naturally, they were in their appropriate casual wear for such hot weather. Each carried their own rucksack, though we had no idea what was inside of them. Yamanishi stood upright and said, Sure is hot. We've been walking for some time. Are we there yet? Sugimura replied, Almost. About 5 minutes, I guess. That's what you said a while ago. Darn, it's so hot. I'm tired already. Well, you're not the only one who's hot, so hurry up and keep walking. So said Kaito. And they all began to walk again, with the camera following them. The Narakubo area indeed looked like it was situated deep within the mountains. While there were signs of human activity along the road, they were largely covered up by the forest. Amidst the bushes, one could occasionally catch a glimpse of the streets of Furuoka town below the mountains. While the road was paved, one could see signs of damage. The asphalt of the pedestrian sidewalk looked as if it was about to come off in pieces the size of fists. Whether it was due to such poor walking conditions, the camera constantly shook as it moved along. If the actors were amateurs, then so was the cameraman. Even a layperson like me could tell the camera work looked unusual, resulting in a hard-to-see visual. The shot then cut to another angle from behind the group. Before long, Sugimura, who led the group, straightened his glasses and pointed ahead. We're here. That's Narakubo. Everyone followed Sugimura's gaze, including the camera, and a basin within the mountain was shown. On top of the basin was a ruin. For someone living in a modern city, to think that such a ruin could exist 20 kilometers from where I lived felt surreal. There were many single houses scattered with broken windows and roofs in disrepair. Some were virtually collapsed. If this place was the ore mine, then these houses would be the miners' houses. Disregarding any signs of human presence, these houses were now surrounded by a thick layer of ivy. An enamel signboard could be seen under what used to be a shop house, further emphasizing the loneliness of the deserted townscape. I see. Sugimura's words weren't made up. This place was indeed worth visiting. The camera panned quickly across such scenes. Maybe it had something to do with the cameraman's inexperience, or perhaps it was done to conceal the actors' crappy performances. At any rate, the next visual shown was quite intense. Even the actors looked stunned by the scenery. As the camera faced towards what they were seeing, someone could be heard whispering, "Wow." I had a feeling that line wasn't scripted. But then the scripted dialogue resumed once again. "I see. This is a good place to collect material," said Katsuda, who took out an instant camera from his pocket and began snapping away. Senoe took a notebook out and began writing. After a brief pause, Kaito began instructing in a loud voice. "Anyway, we need to find a place to stay for the night. We'll start with the research after that. How about there, then?" Konosu pointed to one of the rooms in Narakubo. As the camera moved to where she was pointing, a large building could be seen, seemingly a theater. "We should be safe from the rain if it's there." "I see. Then let's go." The six of them then began to walk down the slope, and the scene faded out. Upon fading in, the screen now showed the entrance of the theater. The group stood before its two glass doors and looked up at the building. The camera panned up towards its dirty walls. Looking diagonally upwards, the theater felt surreal. The camera then returned to the group, where Kaito opened the glass door, and each of them followed him into the theater. The last one to enter was Konosu, with her eyes looking down. She muttered, "For some reason, I have a bad feeling about this." She then entered the theater, and as the six of them entered the darkness within, the scene ended. Both Satoshi and Iwara raised their voices unexpectedly. Satoshi looked delighted, while Iwara looked displeased. "Aha, a mention mystery, huh?" Just a mention mystery?" The next scene resumed within the mansion. Theater. As there would be no electricity in an abandoned village, it was dark inside the building. Compared to the silhouettes of the buildings outside, which could be clearly seen under the summer sunlight, the visual inside was difficult to see, though not bad enough to not be able to make out the actors' faces. The flooring was made of stone, as their footsteps could be heard knocking on it as they walked. "It's full of dust," Yamanishi muttered as she swept the dust off her clothes and fiddled her hair. The blurry visuals probably had something to do with it actually being dusty. Walking beside her, Katsuda looked up and said, "Seems like the building's still sturdy enough." Senochi, still holding the notebook in her hand, turned and asked Sugimura, "They've got quite the theater built in these mountains, haven't they?" The ore mine was profitable after all, in the past anyway, and it's exactly because the mine is so deep in the mountains that they decided to build something like this to entertain themselves. Whispered Satoshi, who had an interest in such trivia, and said to me, "Now they're saying something interesting." It's not as if we were expecting some interesting dialogue to begin with anyway. Kaito then stamped his foot, creating a loud noise that echoed across the hall. As I wondered what was going on, the camera zoomed in on something besides their feet, which seemed to reflect what little light there was. It looked like some shattered glass. "While we're going to stay here for the night," Kaito raised his brow and continued, "it's probably not safe right here, with all the glass shards around." The camera then moved around. While it was hard to see, if this was the theater, then they would be in the entrance lobby. From there, one could see the second floor, as well as 2 flights of stairs in one room. Once again, the camera moved up to show the second floor. It seemed the lobby was surrounded by an atrium. Sugimura and Katsuda then spoke respectively. "Guess we'll have to find somewhere suitable for sleeping then." "You're right, before it gets dark." Nodding in agreement, Kaito looked around and said, "Let's split up to search then. Is there a map we could use? How about this one? Konosu beckoned them to come to the side of the entrance, and the movie cut to the next shot. The following shot showed a map of the theater which Konosu was looking at. As it was dark and hard to see, someone should have shone some light on it with a torchlight. Ah, a map! Satoshi exclaimed gratefully and began to copy that map into his notebook. Though the details were hard to read, as the screen was big, the words were still legible. As the map was shown for about 30 seconds, Satoshi was able to finish copying in time. As shown on the map, the theater was composed of 2 stories. In front of the entrance was the entrance lobby, where the group was right now. Next to the lobby was the office. Going further in was a wall with a set of doors which led to a hall and naturally a stage at its end. On both sides of the hall were 2 corridors, with 2 control rooms on each side. At the end of those 2 corridors were the backstage areas. On the right side of the audience hall was the right stage, and on the left stage. 2 flights of stairs on either side of the lobby led to the second floor. The stairs on the right led to the lighting room, with lighting equipment from its side to shine down onto the stage. Above the office was the equipment room, and opposite the lighting room was the audio room. As both sets of stairs led to the same place, it was possible to get to the equipment room via both sides. The map was also what the group should have seen. The screen then panned towards Kaito as he spoke. Then, let's split up and have a look inside. Won't that be dangerous? Asked Katsuda. There's nothing but ruins here. What's so dangerous about it? Asked Kaito. Senoe then asked, but if we're going to enter the rooms, won't we need a key? Konosu answered in place of Kaito. That won't be a problem. There's bound to be one. She then entered the office next to the lobby. Incredibly, the office door itself was unlocked. The camera followed Konosu into the office, where she looked around 2 or 3 times before noticing a key box hanging by the wall. Here we go. She then excited the office with 1 set of keys, leaving the other set inside the box, which the camera remained fixed on. Though the lighting was dark, on the key holder was clearly written Master Key. With this, we should be able to look around the building. Konosu returned to the hall and showed the set of keys to Kaito, who nodded and took 1 key from the set. Then, let's each take 1 and see if we can find any rooms that we could stay in. It doesn't matter if we end up in separate rooms. Also, have a look for rooms where it's safe to start a fire or clear from any other danger. Everyone then took 1 key from the set held by Konosu, and before long, all the keys were taken. You know, Satoshi said while smiling, realistically, who would ever think of everyone splitting up and moving on their own in such a situation? Isn't entering an abandoned house in a ruin unrealistic enough? So what's wrong with this scene? Satoshi smiled even more. Nope, nothing's particularly wrong, since if they didn't split up we would have no mystery. We're guaranteed one after all. In other words, something's about to happen soon. I'll bet 1 cheese hot dog with you that by the time they're all gathered, there'll be 1 person short. Sitting next to Satoshi, Ibara looked at me with a grim stare. She was probably saying, stop talking about irrelevant stuff and watch the movie already. Even though I wasn't the one that started the conversation. The screen then showed each member checking the map to find the room their key leads to, and disappearing into the darkness of the building 1 by 1. First it was Kaito, followed by Sugimura, Yamanishi, Senoe, Katsuda, and Konosu. No one was left inside the lobby. The screen continued showing the empty lobby for a little while before cutting off. Within the darkness, the narrator spoke again. It was here that the incident happened. Figures, said Satoshi. Shut up, Ibara glared at us again. The next scene opened at the entrance lobby. Again, there was nobody. Konosu was the first to return from the stairs on the right. She was followed by Yamanishi, who came out of the left corridor. Katsuda too emerged from the left corridor, who then asked the two that came before him. "So, how did it go?" Yamanishi replied with a sulky expression. "It was full of shattered mirror pieces. It's unusable without anything to sweep them away." Konosu too shook her head. "I see. It's the same here." Senoe then descended from the stairs on the left. As she approached them, she made an X with her hands to motion that her search was also unsuccessful. Katsuda looked upwards, and the camera duly followed his gaze. Thereupon, the equipment could be seen via the atrium. After showing the window of that room for an unusually long time, Katsuda could be heard shouting upwards. "Sugimura, how goes your end?" Sugimura stuck his head out from the window and shouted, "Though it's surprisingly pleasant inside, there's not much we could use to make fire with." "I see. Anyway, come down first." "Okay." Sugimura promptly came downstairs. There were now 5 people in the lobby. It seemed all but one of them had returned. "I see. So the victim has been decided." Yamanishi spoke. "Where's Kaito-kun?" Katsuda shook his head. "Since we're all here, let's go look for him. I think he headed that way, right?" He pointed towards the right corridor. The rest all nodded in turn. With Katsuda leading, the group entered the right corridor, with the camera following them. As they went deeper, the light went dimmer, and before long nothing could be seen. Someone turned on a hand torch and illuminated a door in front of the corridor, which Katsuda opened. It was a control room, with a line of mirrors and a bunch of abandoned costumes scattered around. There was no one inside. "That's strange. Could he be in the backstage area?" Hitting that suggestion, they all went deeper into the corridor, which was even darker. The hand torch was turned on again, where a door leading to the right stage was shown with a sign saying "Staff Entry Only." Katsuda tried turning the doorknob, but it wouldn't open. "What's wrong?" "It won't open. Maybe it's locked." "What do we do?" "There's another set of master keys in the office. Can someone go get them?" Without knowing who was being addressed, someone went running off. The sound of footsteps overlapping could be heard. It sounded like 2 people had run off to get the key. The next cut showed the door lock being turned open by the key, and the group entering upon opening the door. Inside the left stage was a window. As the curtain was drawn open, the sunlight outside shone in. And in the center of the sunlit room, someone was lying down on the floor. Naturally, it was Kaito. "Kaito!" Sugimura rushed towards him, followed by Katsuda. Sugimura knelt down before Kaito and tried to lift him up, when he felt something in his palms. The camera moved to show what was within his palms. While it was hard to see with so little light, it seemed that Sugimura's palms were quite stained. He muttered, "Blood." Someone screamed. The camera turned to face the 3 girls standing by the door. Yamanishi was lost for words as she covered her mouth. Senoe held her hands together while Konosu gripped her fists. Blood stains were flowing out from the abdomen of the collapsed Kaito, whose eyes were closed. It was just as well, as his crappy performance would have been exposed if he chose to have his eyes opened. The camera then panned towards Kaito's side, which shows his arm being severed. Probably some prop. The dark lighting helped raise the tension as the camera slowly revealed within the severed arm was the key that Kaito had taken with him. Someone gasped while watching the scene. It was Chitanda. Back to the movie, Katsuda yelled, "Kaito! Damn it, somebody help!" He quickly stood up and headed towards the window to try and open it, which was designed to be open while pulling upwards. But as the window had not been used for so many years, it didn't seem to be able to open. Katsuda pressed his hands against the window frame and used his full strength to pull the window upward, which created a loud squeaking noise. Upon finally opening the window, he stuck his body out and looked outside. The camera showed what was outside the window. Nothing but a thick layer of wild grass. Katsuda returned inside and headed toward the stage. The screen suddenly went dark while going from the illuminated room into the dark stage. It was clear it was following Katsuda, who went straight toward the left stage, where he came to a stop. The door connected the left stage and the left corridor was blocked by some boards of squared timber. No way. The screen faded to black. And then, the movie seemed to have ended right there. We waited for a little longer, but the screen didn't come back on. It's over, Ibara whispered in an annoyed tone. Seems so. As if on cue, upon Satoshi's response, a mechanical sound was heard, followed by the screen being drawn upwards. As though trying to stop the screen from withdrawing, Chitana stretched her arms forward pitifully. But it's not over. Maybe they're having some technical difficulties, I said to her, though a voice from behind instantly replied, No, that is incorrect. As we turned around, Irisu had already exited the control room and stood behind us, holding the videotape in her hand. The tape indeed ends here, she said in a calm tone. Of course you would know exactly when the tape ends. Satoshi asked, So, is that the end of the story, if that's where you intended it to end? Of course not. Then it means that this tape was incomplete. I've never heard of a movie preview where people are invited to watch a movie that has yet to be completed. Muttering under my breath, I asked, Would you please care to explain what's going on? This preview isn't gonna end here, is it? Irisu was constantly looking at me as she nodded. Of course not. But before that, I would like to hear something from all of you. What did you think of the movie you just saw, in terms of its cinematography? We exchanged glances with each other. I didn't know about Chitanda, but I was sure the rest of us were in agreement. Ibara replied on our behalf. To be very honest, we thought it was crudely done. That answer was to be expected. That was what I thought as well. You may probably have known this already, but the Kenya Festival is a festival mainly for the arts-related clubs. There was no place for activities by individual classes. However, our class was not content with that. We could not enlist the help of people with the required skills, as they were already busy with their own club activities. But despite that, we still decided to make something of our own. We merely wanted to show people the result of our passion and hard work. She described such a bitter reality in a plain manner devoid of any emotion. However, were they satisfied with just that? As I was thinking, Irisu spoke again. I thought this was good enough, as everyone is enjoying what they're doing and making something of their own. Even though the end product will end up being laughed at, they wouldn't be too concerned at all, as they're easily satisfied. I know it's quite silly, so I would please ask that you turn a blind eye to how crudely they made the movie. So it doesn't matter whether it's crudely done or not? Irisu nodded in answer to Ibara's question. It's not really too much to ask, is it? If it's well made, they would also be satisfied on a different level. Yet the essence of their objective remains the same. Now, what do you think would happen if something calamitous occurred during the making of the movie? After thinking for a while, Satoshi replied, The movie wouldn't be completed. Exactly, and we are not satisfied with that. However, we cannot complete the movie. As you've seen, the location for the movie is quite unique, and we could only go there to shoot during summer vacation. Are you having some problems with the cinematography? Chitanda asked anxiously. Well, that's a problem as well. I'm sure they can sort that out eventually. Taking into consideration our traveling budget and script progress, our schedule was to film on location twice. According to our plans, we should be going once again this Sunday to complete the movie. But something else happened. Faced with my cold remark, Irisu responded truthfully. Yes, we never expected assigning work to an unskilled amateur would create such strain. When we all decided on making a movie, it was agreed that it would be a mystery movie. However, we had no one capable of writing such a script. Only one person among us had any experience writing stories. Her name is Hongo Mayu. She had some experience writing manga, so we entrusted her to come up with a script for a 1-hour movie. As someone who's never written any stories before, I had no idea how tough such an assignment was, though I noticed Ibara raising a brow. She too had experience writing manga, so she's probably sympathizing with Hongo. Hongo was amazing. She had managed to come up with a script despite not having any contact with mystery novels before. However, she was at her limit, and by the time she wrote up to the part where you saw in the movie, she collapsed. Collapsed, meaning she's not alright. Chitana gasped and asked, "What happened to her?" Gastrated from stress, a form of depression. Though it's nothing serious, it's not possible for her to continue her task, so we're seeking out a replacement writer. Sounds like replacement on the battlefield. You're not seriously asking us to do that, are you? Taking over the role of screenwriter for them? Irisu laughed softly and said, "Oh no, we wouldn't impose on you so far. I merely invited you to a preview, and would like to ask one question of you. Who did you think was the killer?" Come to think of it, the movie didn't seem to have anyone resembling a detective character despite this being a mystery movie. That was probably one of the reasons why the movie couldn't make any progress. The second reason was probably due to every actor being assigned similar screen time, resulting in the audience being unable to determine who will play the detective. However, while I was still far from convinced, Ibara was the first to reply. "But, senpai, surely the movie must include scenes for us to deduce who the killer is before we could guess." Irisu shook her head and said, "You need not worry about that. Hongo said she had already written the outline of the resolution before she collapsed, and we should be able to get that part filmed in time." Satoshi inquired further, "But if it's a script written by a beginner in detective fiction, surely she would have left clues before coming to the resolution, or it would seem quite awkward." "That has also been taken care of. She managed to put in everything her wits had to offer. She did say she did some research into detective fiction after all. I believe she stayed true to both Knox and Chandler's 10 Commandments and Van Dyne's 20 Rules." Chitana looked puzzled at the mention of the 10 Commandments. I probably did as well. 10 Commandments? As in, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain? Why did she have to quote such a minor commandment of all commandments? Satoshi answered confidently at Chitana's question. "No, that's Moses' 10 Commandments. We're talking about Roland Knox's 10 Commandments of detective fiction here. Rules like, no Chinaman must figure in the story. Hongo-san must have studied those rules to ensure fair play, giving the audience a fair chance at solving the mystery." Why can't a Chinaman appear in the story anyway? Does their appearance, no matter how entertaining it is, have something to do with politics or some other issue? Then again, these rules are often seen in science fiction as well, though I don't think it has anything to do with fair play. I wonder if I could find the answer if I researched Knox. As I was pondering these questions, Irisu concluded. "In other words, all the clues have been shown. So, who do you think the killer is?" Asking us to figure out who the killer was in an abandoned village deep within the mountains, huh? This sounds ridiculous. Satoshi, Ibara, and Chitanda all exchanged glances with each other. "Who, you're asking me?" That's kind of hard. Conclusions cannot be made from the database. You're right, I'm not confident I'll be able to solve this myself, though I do suspect a few things. Is Kaito-san confirmed dead already in the movie? Upon asking all the questions they wanted to ask, they all turned to look at me at the same time. I could feel my back drooping slightly as their gazes were fixed upon me. I tried to turn my eyes beyond their glare and said, "What?" "Nothing. I was just thinking this was perhaps a job for Hotaro." Satoshi smiled impudently as usual. "What job are you talking about?" "The detective, of course." I could totally imagine what sort of expression I was making then, which Satoshi was quick to describe. "You look as though you don't like that." I nodded silently. As a normal high school student and fervent energy saver, there's no way I would ever get myself involved in anything out of the ordinary. I feel troubled by being so overestimated. In response to my expression, "It probably means you weren't paying enough attention to the movie," Chitanda interrupted with her voice raised. "Why don't we watch it one more time?" Is she serious? As though sensing my thoughts, Irisu intervened and said, "I'm just asking you for an opinion. You don't have to be too serious about it." "Is that so? Then I think Yamanishi's the killer." Chitana turned her head to me and said, "How come?" "Because she had a terrible attitude." "Oriki!" Ibara scolded me with a sharp voice, though I was hardly intimidated. Ibara's only scary when you've truly made a serious mistake, but I was not exactly wrong with my guess here. "Then Katsuda, he looked quite muscular." Satoshi sighed and crossed his arms. You don't seem to be too eager about this. Even I feel like saying, stop saying strange stuff already." "It's not exactly strange, but that itself won't do, as they don't seem to be convinced." I decided to confirm something with Irisu. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you asking an outsider like us? If this question was conceived by Class 2F, surely it ought to be figured out by someone from Class 2F as well." As with before, Irisu nodded and replied, "We did discuss this question among ourselves, though we wish to receive more suggestions from outside. No matter what theories we proposed, we were still clueless in answering it. Like I said before, only those with the necessary skills can do the job required." "Not even you could do it?" "Unfortunately, no. More than anyone, I too would like to figure out who the killer is. Moreover, I have to take care of the filming operation, so I'm quite short on time here." "In that case, why didn't you start anew with something other than mystery then?" It was starting to become like a cross-examination. For the first time, Irisu lowered her eyes, though she still maintained her stern voice. "I was not present in the original planning stages, as I happened to be in Hokkaido for the past 3 weeks. I only heard about the problem from the director upon returning to Kamiyama, and it was only the day before yesterday that I agreed to try and solve the problem. If I had been involved from the beginning, I would not have agreed to make a mystery movie." "Then it has nothing to do with you, does it? You're just doing it out of pity for your classmates." Though that's what I thought, naturally I couldn't say that out loud. So I modified my question a bit. "Secondly, why us? I know you're acquainted with Chitanda, but it seemed like you had intended for us to come all along. There are about 1,000 students in Kami High, so why did you specifically choose the Classics Club?" "Well, it's given that I knew Chitanda personally." "We probably came because of that, as she knew Chitanda would probably be interested in it." Irisu then met my gaze and continued. "Furthermore, you are present." "Me?" That was a surprising answer. I could sense Chitanda, Satoshi, and Nibara looking at me. Though it was mainly down to luck, those involved in investigating the Hyouka incident all seemed surprised at how it was solved. But how did an outsider like Irisu find out about that? Irisu slowly explained the reason. I've heard much about you from 3 people. The first is Chitanda here. The second is someone from outside the school, while the third is Togaito Shoji. I'm sure you've met him before. Who? Oreki, how can you forget? He's the Wall Newspaper Club president. Oh, him. Now I remember. Upon mentioning his name, I suddenly felt daunted. Togaito was a third year whom I crossed paths with before. To put a long story short, I managed to obtain knowledge of a dirty secret of his and used it to my advantage to blackmail him. It's not something I like to recall too much. Irisu seemed to be able to read my thoughts as she said, "Don't worry, Togaito does not think badly of you at all." Well then, do tell him I bless his good soul. When I realized there was no one else who had the skills to finish the story, I immediately thought of you. If it was you, you might be able to play the role of detective. That's amazing, Hotaro! Your talents are being recognized! I glared at Satoshi for his teasing, before returning my gaze to Irisu inside. Me? A detective? I gave my honest reply. I feel quite uneasy to have such expectations placed on me. Surprisingly, Irisu was quick to withdraw her stance. You're right, she sighed and continued. I was merely making a gamble while deciding to invite you to watch the preview, in the hope that the problem could be solved as soon as possible. But I was indeed naive. I apologize for causing you such distress. She bowed upon saying that. Is there anything you'd like to ask? In awe of her vigor, even if I had any further questions, I was left speechless. Upon confirming there was no more questions, Irisu quickly wrapped things up. Then this ends the preview. Thank you for coming. However, the story did not end here. I had totally forgotten the presence of a certain person. Indeed, it was none other than Chitandaeru, the very incarnation of curiosity itself, who would go to all lengths to solve every mystery the universe had to offer. As Irisu was about to turn away, Chitanda called out to her. Please, wait. Is something the matter? Then how would the story end? What's going to happen next? Irisu said as she turned back around. We don't know. We're still working on it. But you must be prepared to accept that it may never be finished. That would be terrible. Terrible? Well, Irisu's feeling terrible as well. Chitana then stepped up her reasoning. Irisu-san, if what you said was true, then it would be a pity if the movie could not be completed. I don't want that to happen. Well, neither does Irisu, but even if you say that. Besides... I started to raise my brows worryingly. This was bad. Something was about to happen. Irisu probably made the right choice in picking Chitanda to solve her problem. Why did the screenwriter Hongo Mayu-san, upon being entrusted with the role, decide that the role was so important that she worked till she collapsed? I'm really curious about it. Standing beside me, Satoshi spoke. Hotaro, whether it's as a detective or whatever, don't you think we have insufficient data needed to solve this? Indeed. That means we'll just have to gather the clues ourselves, right? It's not as easy as it sounds. Yet, upon hearing that, and this was probably Satoshi's plan all along, Chitana quickly turned towards us with a great vigor and said, Oriki-san, let's do this. We must find out what Hongo-san's legacy was. Hongo's still alive, Irisu calmly corrected her, though I had no idea whether our lady heard that. Satoshi spoke once again. Mayaka, how goes the progress for the anthology? You think we could take time off for a week to solve this? Ibara replied with a sour look. The only one not making any progress is you, Fuku-chan. I've pretty much finished my allotted segment already. No, don't sweat the small stuff. Ibara then added as though muttering. I too would like to see this movie completed. Despite its poor cinematography, I never thought images of abandoned villages would look so stunning. As for me, I really was no good at dealing with Chitanda. Since it had come to this, even if I had refused, I would not have been able to escape from her. If I had tried to escape, I would merely end up expending lots of energy, which would be waste, and I hate wasting energy. But this time, I just didn't feel like accepting Irisa's offer to play the role of detective. Despite my energy-saving motto, this time my reason was altogether different. I didn't know whether the other three realized it or not, but even if they did, I decided to ignore them as I said coldly. Let's say we accept this challenge. What if we fail? Do we have to bow apologetically on all fours to the dissatisfied member of Class 2F? For starters, we're not members of the Detective Fiction Study Club. We're members of the Classics Club, a club whose activities were yet to be known. For me, I firmly believed that solving the Hyouka incident was mainly due to luck. As Irisa's offer promised little in return, why should we bear the burden of taking care of Class 2F's project? Chitana felt as though she had had a bucket of water poured on her upon hearing these harsh words. Ibara felt like rebutting and was about to open her mouth. It was at this perfect timing that Irisa decided to offer a compromise. Then, we will not ask you to play the role of detective. There are also people in my class that would like to take on that role. Instead, what do you think if we ask you to act as observer and decide whether the deductions make sense? An observer, huh? If it's to determine whether someone is the killer or not, then that role will be akin to judge and jury. If that's the case, our burden would be considerably lighter. As an energy saver, my urge to turn down this offer had increased, though it was probably not enough to convince Chitanda, whose eyes were beginning to tear up. So I said reluctantly, "We can do that, I guess." Upon hearing that, Chitanda smiled again, while Ibara crossed her arms. Satoshi gave me a thumbs up, and Irisu bowed her head in admiration. Darn, I got drawn into something bothersome again. Oh well, I sighed in my heart and thought, if all we had to do was sit and listen, then I could do that. By the way, for an instant, upon raising her head, Irisu looked as though she had just successfully accomplished something. Was that my imagination?